The World Series is over. The offseason is here. What do the Guardians need to do to get back to the World Series? We've got some thoughts on what this franchise needs to do to have a legitimate shot at getting back to the World Series.
Tanner Bobby of the Guardians, and you're listening to Locked On Guardians.
You are Locked On Guardians, your daily podcast on the Cleveland Guardians. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show today. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started today.
On today's Locked On Guardians, we'll get into what the Guardians need to do to get back to the World Series. We've got mostly the same kind of ideas. We've got a couple of different things we're going to debate about what's important for this franchise to do in order to be contenders again. I know there's going to be comments about payroll. We're going to address those at the end. So I have a comment about payroll. I'm sure Jeff does as well, but I have a specific comment about payroll that will be in the theme throughout if you're going to go ahead and comment on that sort of thing. And we're also going to start off talking about how Craig Albanese is not going anywhere, at least for now.
Yes, but first, I am Jeff Ellis, one of your two co-hosts here. One of the first people brought in to talk about baseball on Locked On. Before that, I was a draft analyst and prospect analyst at Scouting 24/7.
I'm Justin Latta. I've been covering the Guardians minor league system since 2007. I've written at places like Guardians Baseball Insider, the Morning Journal, the News Herald, a cavalcade of other places throughout the years as well. I've had work everywhere, and I've seen this team develop good prospects. I've seen this team have a very terrible time developing prospects and drafting. So we're going to get into a lot of that today among our checklist of things that we think the Guardians need to do to be World Series contenders. Real quickly, before we do get into that, Craig Albanese, reportedly, according to Jeff Passan of ESPN, said that Albanese pulled his name out of the hat for the Marlins job, and he apparently also did the same thing for the White Sox. So, to me, I feel like I know some people on Twitter were suggesting that maybe it was for interview experience, and I can buy that to an extent. I also kind of wonder if maybe those were just not the situations he was willing to take over his first gig, because when you take over your first managerial gig, it is very hard to come back from and get a second chance if things go wrong. And if you put yourself in a situation like these teams that are really in dire needs of long rebuilds, it can be tough to pull out of. And most likely there are not a whole lot of cases where you're there when the team finally pulls itself out. Like the only recent one I can think of is Baltimore, where their manager stuck around, Brandon Hyde. He was there towards the end of the rebuild, and he's still there now, obviously, when they're good. But a lot of guys get there when the rebuild starts as a new manager, and they don't end up sticking around when things finally get good. They get canned before then. So I wonder if some of that factored in to not wanting to have that be his first managerial opportunity.
Yeah, and I don't quite buy the whole it was to get experience, because he got experience last year, right?
Right,
he did it in Cleveland. He had some. So I think there was probably some interest. There's also more experience is a good thing. There's also just the opportunity, and he might have gone and felt like at the end of those interviews like they weren't good fits too. Like there's that degree, not just that the organizations are both very far away, but just that maybe he felt like, okay, this is not, you might go in with certain expectations based on how things are in your last two stops and be like, okay, these are not going to be the same. So it's, selectiveness, as you stated, is not the worst thing. And yeah, sorry. There's a second with some reverb in the background that was throwing me off. But yeah, I just think that there is overall, it's logical.
And it's good for Cleveland too. We talked about a couple episodes ago, if Albanese goes, he's taking people with him from Cleveland possibly, and vote in his second year is losing kind of his right-hand man, the guy you trust the most. And, you want him for this staff. The staff, it sounds like, already really gelled together, despite the fact that you've got a bunch of guys who are young, and you had, holdovers like Valleca, who's obviously now gone, and Willis and Alomar. So it sounds like the staff really gelled. So keeping Alvarez around, I think, can only be a good thing for Vogt and only be a good thing for this franchise as they try to capitalize on what they did in 2024 and not make 2025 like 2023. So the Dodgers are world champs, obviously. Fun season and good for them. I think, no surprise that they won this. They won the title. They were the most talented team all year. They were the best record in Major League Baseball by the end of the season. Not often you see that. Win the World Series, the best record or the highest payroll. That doesn't always work out in postseason because a myriad of things can go wrong, which is why the Guardians
go ahead
chance at being a World Series contender. We'll talk about how they can do that.
Yeah, I think, if you're going to look at the Dodgers and say there was maybe a bit of surprise, would just come from the fact that they had so many pitching injuries. Like, I mean, they did go through it's all their depth was definitely tested. I think you can safely say, and over the course of the season. But that's the nice thing about having a huge payroll is that gives you the depth to recover from that.
Yeah, you can paper over injuries, you can paper over mistakes in ways that other franchises like Cleveland cannot. So that's our first comment on payroll on this, and we're going to address that. But today's topic really is just most about what do the Guardians need to do to get back to the World Series. And Jeff and I sort of not necessarily have a disagreement on this, but I think we are going about it different ways. My big thing for them to get back is when this team has been good historically, at least in the last decade or so, it's been mostly pitching. I know in the 90s they had great hitting, but pitching is way different these days than it was in the 90s, and hitting is just a lot harder these days. Look, pitching is the most expensive thing to go after on the free agent market. There's a reason this team has not signed any major league pitchers on the free agent market, outside of Matthew Boyd and Ben Lively for the first time, and that was out of necessity. This team has to get back if they're going to be serious World Series contenders. To me, and I know Jeff's going to point out this is maybe unfair because some things went their way, and I do agree with that to an extent. But this team has to be able to get back to being the quote-unquote pitching factory. They have a gap right now in their rotation. Like, they were able to bring up last year Tanner Bybee and Gavin Williams and Logan Allen, and right now Logan Allen is a giant question mark. Gavin Williams, is also kind of a giant question mark, truthfully, too. Mm-hmm. Although I'm willing to give him a mulligan just because he wasn't healthy most of the year, and Logan Allen was, and just, regressed by a lot. Not that I'm writing him off either, but you were able to bring up 3 rookies that were major impacts in the rotation in 2023, and only Tanner really survived and gave you what you needed this year from the rotation from that group. And they drafted what, Jeff, 20 pitchers that year in 2021, and a couple more of those guys.
Wasn't it 19 with 2? Wasn't there 2 bats with the bonus picks? Wasn't it 19 out of 21?
That was Connor Cox and Jake Fox.
Fox, right?
Yeah, so 22 picks, 20 pitchers. 21 picks, 19 pitchers. But
yeah.
Only 2 of them have made the majors. Some more might make it, which is good. We'll talk about them as the offseason goes on. But even in 2019, you go back and look at the injuries they had in 2019, and they were good. They were not a great team in 2019, but they would have made the playoffs under the current format. They won 93 games, missed the wild card, which is tied for the most wins to not make the playoffs in the AL with their own selves back in 2005. And that was the year they brought up guys like Aaron Savali and Zach Plesac. And obviously Plesac, fell off, but Savali has proved to be a good major league starting pitcher. This team has always been able to fill the gaps with starting pitching. You go back to Kluber. You go back to Carrasco. It took a long time in development and patience with Carrasco. Salazar was always kind of a ticking time bomb, but he did have his day in the sun. For all the stuff that happened at the end with Clevenger, he was good early in his career for Cleveland. Mm-hmm. Bauer had some good moments in Cleveland as well. And you could argue, I know you're going to argue, behind them they didn't have a whole lot of depth, but they developed those guys all in-house. They did a good job of developing those guys.
Well, 2 of them they got through trades to develop.
True. So they still
and even Carrasco, like they, Carrasco
Bauer came through the system.
Carrasco and Bauer were already like AAA guys. Kluber was older and in AA. Clevenger was the only guy who I think even spent any time below AA that they got in any of those trades. So it actually, the pitching factory was in large part thanks to being able to identify organizations that weren't doing good jobs and then kind of targeting and going for certain guys. I think part of the pitching factory's success, like I said, it's kind of interesting because they did it like all of those pitchers were external. And most of them, they got to do advanced minor league scouting on, and they saw things that maybe they thought they could work on or they liked, and they went from there. But they did, outside of like Bieber, no one was internal. I guess Salazar too, but it's like everyone else was an external guy. The pitching prospects they did have, they traded away at various points, who were the guys they took in the first round and things like that. Sam Henches might be the most successful prospect kind of that time era of pitching prospect coming up. So they made a lot of acute trades that I don't know if you can get away with anymore. Like part of it was just that era. And then I think the bigger part, what I was arguing with you a little bit before, is health. Like all of those guys, Clevenger had surgery, but like almost everyone else was not just fairly clean in the big leagues. They had clean developmental years. They didn't lose any of their developmental time. They didn't have any potholes. They moved quickly. And if Cleveland's current batch of pitchers had not had any health potholes, it might be the same right now. If Gavin Williams doesn't miss half of this year, if Daniel Espino was up and running, if Tristan McKenzie doesn't miss 2.5 years in the minors due to health, it may not. The pitching factory might be fully intact. It could just be the fact that one group had no health issues for the most. And once Clevenger got here, he had nothing. And this group has been just ravaged. So. Yeah, it's that's my view, and I'll also say it's like the pitching was a struggle, but like the hitting was what let him down in the postseason. So I still think, and for as well and as excited as many of us got over the last 2 to 3 years about the developmental pipeline, we're still not seeing it pay off with hitters. We're still not seeing that pipeline, which thankfully they are changing the approach. But I think a lot of the issues we're just focused on a very we'll get into that. I think
we will. Yeah, we'll get into the hitting in the second segment. My only thing with the pitching is, like I said, you're not going to go out and you're not going to sign Garrett Coles. You're not going to sign Max Scherzers. You're not going to trade for that. Maybe you can trade for those types. And you're right. There is an extent of health that has to go your way, and identifying guys through trades, which is still part of the developmental process, is being able to do that sort of thing, which we're also going to get into among trades and later in the show. But you still have to have that depth. Like I just don't think this team, the way they're set up, again, payroll and just how the organization is run, I don't think they can be serious serious contenders until they develop. And I know injuries again, and that, you have to plan for that too. Injuries are part of the game. You're going to have pitchers get hurt. I mean, the Dodgers had a lot of pitching injuries, and they papered over it because they had money. And they could withstand some of those injuries, and it took a lot to do that. And they had other things go right for them as well, and that's what money buys you. It buys you a lot of flexibility and being able to withstand those kind of injuries and tests. And Cleveland's just not going to have that. Let's be honest here. I know people are going to say, "Well, then spend money." Again, we will talk about payroll later. I will talk about that. But my thing is, the front office can't control payroll. They're told what they can spend, what they can't spend. So in their situation, to me, the best thing they can do is to continue to try to get back to the teams that had Corey Klubers and Carlos Carrasco's and Shane Biebers. You have to be able to try to find a way to recreate that pipeline. I know you said injuries and
one was exceptionally healthy, one is exceptionally unhealthy. If you balance those two out, like I said, it might be the same. That's where I argue, because they didn't have great depth even when the pitching factory is at
they
peak.
didn't. No, and you have to be able to build the depth in order to withstand those sort of things. But I just think that starting out the path to getting to the World Series and even winning it, this team, the way they're going to have to do it, to me, is getting back to that pitching, and it's building the depth and to withstand those injuries and to be able to overcome issues with depth and also use them in trades, which we'll talk about later in the show as well. I think that's just where they have to get back to start.
I think I disagree, because I think that the trick to getting there very quickly is just it's very clearly they just got to sign Juan Soto, Corbin Burns, Blake Snell, Alex Bregman, Max Fried, and they're all set. Like that, just sign those
Yeah,
five
no, you're
guys.
right.
Yeah, there we
Yeah,
go. I fixed it.
2025 world champs.
Yeah,
on paper.
I fixed it. I just fixed it.
Yeah.
See?
Jeff figured it out. All right.
Yep.
So my first step is to get back to being the pitching factory, and also including this is to extend Tanner Bybee. They did not want to pay the money it took to extend him last offseason. You know, right now we're looking at Austin Peterson and Parker Messick as the next wave, and those guys are fine. I'm not saying they're not quality pitching prospects, but they are not, to me, the kind of pitching prospects where you're going to be like, okay, well, we'll let Tanner develop and walk, or we'll trade him as last year. We'll replace him with Austin Peterson. We'll replace him with Parker Messick. Like, no, like Tanner Bybee is the one guy you've really developed that you have a chance to keep, and a guy that actually has a chance to be a frontline starter. Maybe not an ace, but maybe a guy who's like a good number 2, whereas everybody else is not even on that level, and they don't have that guy in the system right now. And it, maybe it's, if Daniel Espino's shoulder ever cooperates, maybe it's one of these high school kids they drafted. We'll find out. But
It's tugboat.
You got to be able to keep the guys that you actually developed in house, and be able to bring guys in behind that. All right, so we'll get into hitting next and what the Guardians need to do to change their hitting philosophy to get back to the World Series as well.
But first, we are going to talk about our good friends over at FanDuel, and get ready to tackle NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. I almost read that in reverse, which you'd be like, what? Why? But no, it's $5 to get $150. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, or when you want to check out live stats, or if you play-by-play, and so much more, you can all do it at the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets when you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
The one thing on the hitting side of things, Jeff, we both definitely agree on what the Guardians need to change first and foremost is cutting the chase out. This team finished 5th worst in Major League Baseball this year in chase rate. And they had previously gone in on this contact approach. Like, we're going to try to take guys that make a lot of contact. We're going to try to teach them bat speed. We're going to increase exit velocity that way. We're going to take the margins on their power, and we're going to increase their power marginally through that. And I don't necessarily disagree with that. You still need guys that are just power hitters. You need a balanced lineup. I don't necessarily disagree with that approach, except for the fact that they've taken guys that are heavy contact hitters who chase a lot. You can't have guys, we've said this multiple times out there, people are probably sick of us saying it. You cannot have guys that are consistently swinging at, it's the Josh Naylor stuff. It's the John Kenson Wells stuff. Yeah, those guys can hit balls 420 feet. That's fantastic. You cannot have them hitting pitches that they have no business putting in play because they can't do anything with it. It's not even strikeout rate. It's not striking out, but you can't consistently have a lineup full of those guys who, Tyler Freeman and Miles Straw and Andres Jimenez, where, they don't strike out, but they're hitting 85-mile-an-hour ground balls to second base. They're hitting weak pop-ups because they're making contact with pitches they just should not swing at, and they're out of the zone. And look at the bottom 5 teams this year, Jeff. You have Miami, Colorado, Houston, and Chicago, the White Sox. Now, you say, well, Houston did it, but you want to know what Houston also did this season in terms of batted ball data is they were first in hard hit rate. They hit the ball hard first and foremost. Like, that's a team that knows how to hit the ball hard. So they might be chasing everything. They're consistently in the top 5, the top 10 every year of hard hit rate. So you got to get back to finding a way, and it's not going to be solved through hiring a hitting coach. I know some people are going to say,
no.
Sorry, Houston actually fell this year in terms of hard hit rate. They were, wow, I can't even find them on here. That's not good. Houston was middle of the pack, 15th. So that's part of the reason they were eliminated early this postseason, maybe. But you're not going to solve this problem by a hitting coach, by the way. Like, this is an organizational philosophy.
Yeah, it's swing changes don't happen. Like we talked about that. You can go back and listen to last week's show where I pulled out like 0.2% of guys have changed their, less than 1%, less than half of a percent of guys will have a significant, you can argue significant, but a 6-point change in chase rate. And I think the bigger issue here, to expand upon it, is like, it's fine to have guys like that, but I think you want to build a baseball
Not
lineup.
9.
No, you want to build a baseball lineup kind of like what they used to say, like an NFL receiving core. Like, you don't want 5 guys that do the exact same thing. You want different players who can complement and do, you want your tall guy who can post up. You want your speed down line. You want someone who can maybe have some quick cuts. Like, you want to have a few guys who are, at points you and I will have discussions. Like, we were talking about Drew Jones off air as every day, or Dave Wendell mentioned him as a player who, maybe he has a buy low. And I bring it up because you and I debated on him. But one of the things you and I will often talk about is like this idea of, well, he might be passive. Well, frankly, this team could use a few passive hitters. And there's been points where like we've been worried about that with Bazana. I'm just gonna say his name wrong every time. Just get used to it, people. But it's one of those things, like having a few guys who are overly passive is not the worst thing. And sometimes you need that when you have other guys who aren't. I think the problem was they only drafted one type of hitter, which was a relatively safe player where they're hoping to increase them. Basically, they're drafting guys who most of the league saw as 40s or 45s and thinking we can maybe work on A, B, and C and get them into 50s or 55s. And there's 2 parts to it. One is like, well, if it doesn't work, you have a backup or a guy who's more of a quad A type. And that's, you need at least 2 areas of improvement. If it does work, I mean, yes, I would gladly take a 50 right fielder, a 50 catcher on this team, which they did not have a year ago, a 50 consistent center fielder. But you're not getting impact, right? And they needed more guys. And then that also hurts your ability to do trades when you're basing your whole team and every single draft about, let's get 20 guys who are close to the big leagues, that if we can work on 1 or 2 things, they're sure, like measuring players on likelihood to the big leagues and then going for guys with, well, high contact means they're going to get through the minors easier. Like, I don't think that was the right approach. And it's fine to go with a few guys like that. Like an OOTP. Yeah. When a guy hit 80 contact, I always tried to get a hold of him. But I also always had a few guys with 70 I always had 1 or 2 with at least 60 power. Like, you need that balance. And unfortunately, they just went all in and it destroyed all balance to the system, which I think has hurt them. It's like, we can literally, everyone on this team, like Daniel Schneemann might be the most passive hitter they've had develop, who played significant time in the last, 5 years, who was a draft and develop guy. Like,
Quan's passive-ish.
Yeah, I mean, fair. I'm being over the top, but like, you've got Quan, but like, Schneemann might be 2 or 3 in this developmental cycle. And I'm not sure he's an everyday big leaguer or if he's just a quad A big league type of guy. Like, they needed more balance, and unfortunately there wasn't any.
The force always needs balance, right, Jeff?
Yes.
There always has to be balance in the force.
Yep. You need those midichlorians to maintain a good balance.
Yes, absolutely. Or there's a dichotomy. What was the word? There was a rift. I don't know.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Can't even get our own nerd references right on the show.
No,
at this point.
I really haven't watched it in a while.
Yeah, a dyad. Is that what it was? A dyad in the force. That's what it was. Yes.
Well, those are the new ones. So they had the force dyad with the. Well, that's we're getting into nerdy stuff for.
Yeah, and this is nerdy too. The chase rate thing. Like,
yeah,
they have to draw walks. If you're not going to be a team, I said this all year, and again, I know people are sick of it, but like, if you're not going to be a team that's gonna, it's gonna be middle of the pack home run wise, you got to draw walks. You can't rely on BABIP all the time, and you can't just put the ball in play. Like, and that's fine. Like you said, some guys it's fine. You have to have different guys in the lineup to do those things, but like, I look at Yordan Alvarez, like that's the unicorn hitter this team really needs. They need a guy who doesn't strike out and also hits for power. That's easier said than done. And I know someone's going to say, well, that could be Noel. No, that's not going to be Noel. Noel is not going to become Yordan Alvarez. I can this for all the things Noel could be, that is not what his most likely outcome is going to be. Jeff did touch on something a second ago about trades and development. Cleveland maybe did change that this offseason, and it showed in their ability to make trades this winter or this summer. And that might be the best thing going for them right now is what they did in the draft this past year. And we're going to talk about why in just a second. The best thing you have going for you when it comes to buying tickets is using the Game Time app and using Game Time picks to find last minute deals, all in pricing, views from your seat. And Game Time picks also shows you what's the best deal for that game or that event you want to go to. It's going to show you amazing deals and best deals, and they're going to show you what it's compared to and why you're getting a good deal. That's why they have all those things built into their app that is really easy to use. Again, I know my wife's going to use it next month when she goes to a Blue Jackets game with some friends in Columbus for a conference because we have the code and it's a great code to take advantage of, but also just an easy way to get tickets to any event, whether it's hockey or comedy shows, concerts, whatever you want to go to. I would use Game Time. I always use Game Time for those sorts of things. It takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets and more with Game Time picks. Download the Game Time app and create an account and use our code LOCKEDONMLB to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, but again, create the account, redeem our code LOCKEDONMLB to get $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. So, Jeff, before you were talking about the farm system and this is, I think we did this in the off season last year. We did like a tools draft, right? We talked about the best tools in the system among prospects, and what we do.
As I recall, did not do well. We won't be doing that this off season.
Yes, we will. We will, because I think it's an important exercise to see where the farm system's at. So we'll force people to listen to it again and get it right this time. But what we found from that experiment was that this farm system lacked impact tools. You were saying you lacked impact. It's a lot of guys who are 45s, and you're hoping with a couple of developmental pieces they can become 50s. And it's fine to have some of those guys, absolutely, but you can't have 10 or 15 make up your 40-man roster or your 26-man roster. You need guys with more impact tools. And not only is it important to do that for your own Major League roster, it's important to do it in trades. And the one thing you noticed this year, I'll let you talk about it, is they sort of leveraged the farm system this offseason in a different way than they have in the past. And the draft they made this year, the draft picks they made in 2024, also give them a chance to do it in the future. And that's taking a little more risk on upside and a little bit more risk on complete downside, but also trying to make their farm system more attractive in trades. Because it's not just enough to graduate Brian Rocchios and Stephen Kwans and, whatever else to your Major League team. That's fine and dandy, but you got to be able to go out and get, a Lane Thomas. You got to be able to go out and trade for a Matt Olson or Sean Murphy, right? You got to be able to go make those trades and to get the things you're not drafting and developing and to help accelerate your timeline or take advantage of a season like they did in 2024. And part of that is adding impact talent that only not necessarily makes your roster, but helps you fill those holes on your roster currently.
Yeah. Like, I mentioned a little bit in the previous segment, like I understand the approach. And there's a lot of times where I've said, hey, if you have 9, nine's a lot. If you have like 5 guys make to the big leagues from a draft, it's a successful draft. Unfortunately, Cleveland's living that a little too much. They're not making many big swings. It does limit the upside. Now, the interesting thing is last year's draft was different. Listen, their first rounders have been some big swings, but basically, what I brought up during the season, when I brought up to you in the offseason, is they did the San Diego approach. And what's that mean? It means last year they traded Alex Clemmie, their recent draft pick, who's a lefty with a high ceiling and a ton of risk. Like, Alex Clemmie is the definition of high risk, high reward. Like, there is a world where that dude never gets out of AA. And there's a world where he becomes, a number 2 starter. Like, he had a lot of things going against him. That is the type of prospect you want to trade. And why is that? Because the positive versus the negative outcomes, you have such a wide range that the medium outcome is actually like not a major leaguer for him. The medium middle outcome for Alex Clemmie is not a big leaguer. He has to be above the median outcome. But teams like to trade for ceiling. So you get a Clemmy in, and you have Rafael Ramirez, you and I both liked, who had a miserable year but has fantastic tools. And then you put in Jose Tena, who, hey, solid depth third piece, perfect. Because he can definitely handle
Complimentary
short.
piece.
Yeah, he is a perfect third piece, because worst case, he's probably a solid utility type, and he can handle a valuable position. And there are positive traits with him. So that's a great deal for Washington. Then they go and they make the Cobb deal. Brezhnehan, you and I both thought he was one of the sleeper in the 23 draft. Like, he had shown a lot of positive growth, but another high school kid, a guy they paid a lot of money to, honestly, but a high school kid that they gave a lot of money to, who they've turned around and flipped. And why did it say that's what San Diego did? And the reason you do that, and this year they took all of the high school arms, because look at Dylan Lesko. Dylan Lesko got hurt, hasn't pitched much, looked, maybe one of the worst performances I've ever seen when I got to see him this year. Like, he could not find a strike zone with a seeing eye dog and 3 helpers. It was bad. But the ceiling is there was a time before his injury where people were saying he's the best right-handed pitching prospect ever in a draft class, prep wise, but still, that was a little bit hyperbole. He was a really interesting guy. And they were able to take that guy who is just hasn't done much since he got drafted and flip him for massive assets. High ceiling prep players, and specifically pitchers, maintain their value. And honestly, they maintain their value even if they get hurt, because then it's still there. We at some point we'll talk about Justin Campbell. Justin Campbell's gotten hurt twice. If he was a high school kid, it wouldn't be as concerning 3 times. Sorry, got it wrong. Justin's correcting me for those of you who aren't on YouTube and can't see it. But if he was a high school kid, he would have a ton more value than he has now. Now I wouldn't say he's a non-prospect, but he is really off the radar. Whereas with a high school kid, you would still have some value. It's there's still time for him to catch up. There's still time for that role. So injuries don't ding their value unless there's a lot of them. They maintain it more.
Does not have a lot of value.
Yeah, it's because it's 3 in a row. Go for one more, go for it. But no, don't go for it, please. But for the most part, it's like I said, you can look at the Padres, look at Dylan Lesko. Robbie Snelling wasn't having a great year, but he had a good year the year before. You don't need a whole lot. Teams will gamble, because every team needs pitching, as you mentioned in segment 1. This goes back to that. And teams will yeah, why not? I'll gamble. That is what's going to help you get a deal done. Or Sean Murphy deal, right? Go back to that one. Yeah, Estrella Ruiz is the centerpiece, but then it's 3 interesting arms. All I can think of is Freddie Tarnock, and then I want to say the number 2 piece was someone in high A who throws hard.
Oakland screwed the pooch on both.
They did, but that's what they wanted.
Impact. Cleveland didn't have impact. It was it was Brian Rocchio's and Jose Tena's.
Yeah, Cease trade was more arms. That's arms are what teams want. That's where it is. In Cleveland, when you go back to why those deals didn't happen, it's because Espino was a concern, and maybe they didn't want to trade Tanner, and or they didn't want to trade Gavin, and they just and listen, I believe in Logan Allen, but Logan Allen is probably best case of 5. He's not the exciting ceiling that's going to help you get a deal over the finish line.
No, and that's part of the farm system. It's not just graduating guys to the majors; it's using them in trades. So you can take the Tanner Bybees and the Logan Allens and the Gavin Williams. That's fine, but you've also got to take your swings on the high school pitching class and the high school hitting and internationally. And their international class is the whole other piece of this. What is the common theme in their international class the last several years? It's been guys who are very hitterish, who they think make a lot of contact. The power is limited. And again, that's a fine approach if you want to take a couple of those guys. But the big money guys they're spending on, who is it? Robert Arias, their center fielder they took this past year. Again, Brian Rocchio, all these guys they've had, Welbin Francisca, they are all contact first guys. And if that tool doesn't turn out to be a 70, you're talking a 45, a utility guy, and they have no impact tools to follow it. And that doesn't help your big league club unless you've got other guys to complement them. And it doesn't help you in trades because you don't have tools that entice teams to trade for those players like Rafael Ramirez, like Alex Clemmy. You need to have guys with those tools, A, for your own team. Hopefully you can develop them, get them to your roster, but B, also be able to have them in trades. And like you said, high schoolers and the supplies to international free agents. Those guys are going to hold their value, especially international free agents. Those guys are all going to hold their value a lot longer just due to age. So I think it's just playing the odds, right? At that point, it's not necessarily the player itself. It is the player itself, but you're just playing the odds that these guys are younger and they'll hold value more. And if they show anything, you can get a team to buy in on, hey, this guy is young and he's got a 60 tool possibly. And versus a guy who's 24, 25 out of college who hasn't made his major league debut that nobody wants. And, Brian Rocchio might have still held his value, but again, what's his best tool? It's a glove. It's a 55, 60 glove, and teams can develop that on their own very cheaply. As for the payroll side of this, really quick, as we're going to jump into AFL before we get out of here today. As for the payroll piece of all this, the reason we brought all these things up, because most of this is somewhat payroll agnostic, because I hate to borrow the phrase from Moneyball. If you try to play like the Yankees in the offseason, you're going to lose to them. The payroll is the payroll, guys. Like, we could sit here and talk about it all day. And yes, payroll is what allowed the Dodgers to paper over all of their injuries and all the mistakes. Look at what happens when Cleveland does spend money. You have Edwin Encarnacion, which was good, but Josh Bell and Mike Zunino fell apart. Michael Bourne and Nick Swisher fell apart. Nick, when Travis Hafner was getting hurt on his big deal, the team was in a sunk cost, and they had nowhere to get out from under those trades, and it really hurt them competitively. And you can say that's on the owner, and that's fine. Whether it's Paul Dolan or it's the new ownership group, that thing's not going to change, at least not for a long time.
No.
The one thing this franchise can do to get back to World Series contention is what they did moving into 2016. They had a roster that was ready to win the World Series, and they convinced them to go out and sign Edwin Encarnacion. Now, some of that was because Encarnacion's market fell to them. Let's be honest here. It's not like
100%.
It's not like they went out and were like the most competitive bidders on him. No, it's because the market came into them and they took advantage. But the best way to convince them to spend the money that way is to build the roster from within. It's to develop guys with big tools. It's to have pitching depth. It's to trade from your farm system to grab talent when you need it. That's the way you get buy-in with this team. The Astros in 2017, I know people are going to say they cheated. And I understand that. They did cheat. The Astros were like 15th in payroll in 2017. And I don't think they needed to cheat, honestly, to win. They were good enough without it. And Corey Kluber said that in his own podcast. If you haven't listened to that, that team was good enough to win without cheating. And they won. They won the World Series. I know it's the threading the needle of it all. But again, we're talking about how can the Guardians win a World Series? How can they get back to World Series contentions? It's all the things we laid out here. And quite honestly, a lot of that is just internal development and drafting and making smart trades and spending the way they've done it all this time. But the problem is a lot of these things we talked about, they're struggling to do right now. And I shouldn't even say struggling because they've won the division 2 out of 3 years. We shouldn't sit here and say, well, this team's nowhere near close to winning, because that's not true. They've won the division 2 out of the last 3 years. They are clearly a team that's good enough to compete right now. But how do they get to that next step? And I think it's a lot of the stuff we talked about today.
No, agreed. Yeah, I think unfortunately money is never going to be their strong point. Let's just be honest.
No,
it's a small team.
So there's that, and then that's why I keep bringing up internal pitching and making those trades and taking big swings developmentally. Quick AFL check-in on prospects. Look, Chase DeLauder has DH'd in 7 games down there. I'm not really concerned about what Chase DeLauder isn't doing in AFL. The only concern is he staying on the field? Is he getting hurt again? And he has been, but he's only played 7 games. He's DH'd in all of them. This is just about reps. I am not paying attention at all to what he's doing down there because, yeah, he's got good exit velocities. He's always had that. There's really nothing he can do in the AFL where I'm going to be like, wow, this is a great sign. He's always hit the ball hard when he's healthy. He's DHing and he's barely playing. There's nothing really worth checking on in terms of Chase DeLauder. He's got to come back in 2025. He's got to play over 100 games for the first time, and he's got to produce, and he's got to force his way to the majors. The guy to me who is having the best AFL for them is Cody Huff. This is a guy who does not come with a strong offensive profile. He's hitting the ball over 100 miles an hour consistently. He has a 424 on base because he walks, Jeff. Look at that. He walks.
What's a walk?
He only played 7 games. I don't know what a walk is. No idea. So he's having a great AFL. Milan Tolentino is not. On the pitching side of things, it's not great. Don DeLucia has struggled. Alan Hernandez has struggled. Alaska Abney's been fine, but like we've talked about that. And Andrew Misiazek's just rehabbing from Tommy John. So this AFL group, it's very uninspiring. Like DeLauder shouldn't even be there. Like that's not where he should be, but he has to be because of what happened this year. But that's your AFL check-in. Someone was asking for it.
Yeah. Just remember the basic rule for the AFL is it doesn't really matter unless you're doing really bad offensively or really great as a pitcher because it's such a hitter-friendly environment.
Monday show. Back to position previews. We did shortstop last week. We had a lot of requests for relievers. We could do bullpen next time. Let us know what position group you want us to review from 2024 next. Also, shout out to Everyday. I shouted him out yesterday. I pronounced the name Michael. It's actually pronounced Michaela. So I'm sorry, Michaela. Michaela, I got that wrong. But thank you for being an everydayer and thanks for your support.
Yeah, and thank you all for your support. I hope you enjoyed our discussion today. I think it was a fun one. I think there's a lot of great stuff to take away. I think no matter if you're someone who's frustrated with the team or is enjoying the team, I think we had something that probably appealed to all of you. Join us every day. And if you have not, go back and listen to old episodes. Thank you to our everydayers like John and Zeev and David. Where are you, my David Lane? Thank you all, and go Guardians, go.